Hey everyone, welcome back to my video. I'm Sean with BlueRidgeSilverhound, and today we're going to talk a little bit about this. If the dies are going to fail, they will lead to some pretty nice finds. Very interesting, very collectible, very valuable in certain states, and everything kind of begins at the process of minting the coins. We have our pair of dies. You have an anvil die, which is normally stationary, and you have a hammer die, which is the one that moves. You also have something called a collar. I have an example of a die and a collar from the most recent Heritage auction sale, where they were selling a bunch of Fred Weinberg's collection. Great example, by the way, of a dime collar. A collar is a die. It breaks the same way that a die does, especially after so many strikes. These things get beat up pretty good. So you can imagine a set of dies, depending on denomination. Usually, the larger the coin, the more that they'll wear out quickly. And let's start from the bottom. Your smaller denomination of coins like pennies and dimes. A set of dies can crank out many hundreds of thousands of coins through the life of a set of dies. So the mint employees, they go in and they constantly inspect these dies. They look for little fractures and cracks, things like that. They look for terminal breakage where pieces of the die had fallen off, and then they'll go ahead and replace that. They call these working dies. As its name suggests, these dies, go through a lot of work, and they are the workhorses of the production of today's coins. So this is an 1870 seated Liberty half-dollar canceled die. This actually is an example that had sold on Heritage auctions. This one has a slashed cross cancel, which was something that you saw quite a bit, even up as recently as 30, 40 years ago, when the U.S. Mint was canceling more modern dies, like on commemorative coins and things of that nature. By today's standards, the U.S. Mint goes a little bit of the extra mile, and they actually grind off all of the design parts of the die to where it's almost kind of like a beveled or rounded top. It looks unrecognizable to what is normally used to produce today's coinage. It just looks like a piece of trash, chunky piece of metal. Obviously I prefer, dies like this. I mean, there are people that collect the dies, although there's not too many of them out there on the secondary market, and folks really don't want the ground down canceled dies from the more modern production of coins. So with the collar right here, these things crack, they fracture. This is a single piece collar. This actually sits on top of the die, and it moves up and down how it needs to during the process where the planchet gets fed into the striking chamber. A feeder finger will actually place it right in here. Because this is a die, and this is a Roosevelt dime die, you guys know that on Roosevelt dimes, they have those lines on the edge. They call those reeded edges. That, I guess kind of makes them easier to grip the coins. I believe that there's a different reason why that the reeds are on there, but you also see it on quarters and half dollars, things like that. And then on the newer, dollar coins, this collar would actually have the date, mint mark, and the motto, and along with a few star designs on there as well. So that's what the collar does. The collars on the much more modern, like say dollar coins, for example, I believe are 3-piece collars. This is a single piece collar that you see here. So these things can crack the same way that the dies can crack themselves. There is actually something called a collar cud, which you can find on various coins. It's just a crack in the collar, that's creating a raised kind of like die chip on the very edge of the coin, or a cud in that case. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about how the coins are being produced, just by looking at a couple of integral parts to the mint presses without actually showing you a mint press. There are actually a multitude of various really awesome resources online to see the minting process as it's occurring. And you'll get to see, a couple of these components in there as well. So these are the items that are subjected to a lot more wear and tear. And, when there's a crack in the die, that will then in turn translate into a raised crack on the coins being produced. All right. So with that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at from kind of like the where it all begins to the more terminal appearance of these worn down dies, the wear and tear dies that we see. This is the 2020 Lincoln Shield Cent. This is a much newer coin. Now in the obverse, it doesn't look like there's anything of note. This is a just lightly circulated coin right here. People in the hobby will look at this coin and say, yeah, it's kind of like a low end mint state coin, whatever. But when we look at the back of the coin, and you'll have to give me a second, my computer is a little bit on the slow side, but this one right here is what they call a bisecting die crack. It goes, and bisecting by nature is it goes from one side to the other all the way across, and you can fully identify the crack as it snakes its way through the devices on that particular side. So you'll notice that this particular one is a pretty nice crack. This is actually a very desirable coin. I've seen a number of these sold. I don't personally own one, although I am looking for one currently. But on the much newer coins, these are beginning to show up a little bit more, even on brand new 2022s. Now, as far as die cracks are concerned, this is kind of like the more major example of this. There are much more minor die cracks. Folks have found something called spike heads, which is simply a die crack that connects from this rim area here above the word "we" and cracks either in between the W and E or through one of the letters and into Lincoln's scalp, top of the hair area. You'll also find little cracks, going through the date, and then here is another vulnerable spot right here at the bottom of the bust. This area is normally prone to more wear and tear on the dies than anywhere else on the coin, and same goes for this area too. It's a very delicate part of the coin. But this is kind of like your standard die crack. Again, this is a bisecting die crack. Another thing to keep in mind, which is pretty neat, is if you're looking at the design on either side of the crack, you're going to notice that, let's say this letter P looks fine here, but when you get on the other side of the crack, there's some displacement. You can see the bottom part of the P is shifted to the left and maybe a little bit upward. That's what you want to see for a retained cud, or a pre-cud is what folks are calling it today, which we'll get to here momentarily. But this is a really dramatic bisecting. When there is another crack that formulates off of this main bisecting crack, and maybe it goes to the right or up more or whatever, they call that a shattered die event. Where there's three different, entry points from the rim that goes into the design, and they actually meet somewhere in the middle. All right, so like this coin, for example, ended up selling for $275 on October 14th, just a few short months ago. As a matter of fact, it's about 2 months ago to the day. That's a pretty good sale, but it also shows you that even regular die cracks have a huge secondary market. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is something that you cannot possibly ignore. Now, again, like I had reiterated and stated a few minutes ago, this is kind of like more of one of the extreme die crack events that you could find. Spike heads do not sell for hundreds of dollars. Typically you could sell those for around $2 to $5. But they show up a lot more frequently in change today. Here's another good one right here. Now, this is what they call an interior die break. So a piece of the die had fallen off. somewhere in the design devices, somewhere in the middle of that die. But it doesn't necessarily crack to the edge of the coin. A lot of the die failure at this point is relegated to the design on the inside. Little chips fall out, things like that. This has a cute nickname of the cracked die Lincoln. Something very common that you see on 1950s Lincoln cents. This particular example right here shows kind of like one of the more extreme examples of an interior die break. And again, these things are very collectible. These are attributed on a website called cudsoncoins.com. Once they have their attribution number, people can easily identify what that particular progression is and shape and size of the interior die break. You also notice that there's a few little small die cracks that go through the word God right here, and that's especially neat. On the reverse, normally you won't see anything as a result of the interior die break event on the obverse of the coin. So, you got to make sure you flip all your coins over. While this is a very neat, very high grade example, it also sticks out like a sore thumb. And this is something that actually you could feel with your thumb if you accidentally rub across it. So make sure you're looking out for this. This is actually a very, very neat coin. And yeah, these also are collectible. Now, not quite collectible, similar to what we saw on the bisecting die crack. This one is a current auction, by the way, with 6 days left. Looks like they just posted it. $2.50. I've seen these sell for about $5 to $10, and because this is a much higher graded example, I expect it to sell for some amount of money. So this is, again, a really good catch by the seller. Something, again, to look out for. Again, this is all part of the wear and tear kind of progression of how the dies fail over time. Here's another one right here that folks have been looking for, and it's quite minor at first glance, but these have a nickname called the Beehive Die Chip. Again, it's another form of an interior die break. On this particular example, it shows a rather small to medium-sized die chip on the left side of Monticello on the building here. When we get in a little bit closer, this is what it looks like. This particular date of coin is the 2020, and that's like one of the more common dates to find this particular event. While neat, it is kind of collected more so as a progression, and what I mean by progression is they'll try and find the earliest progression or earliest smaller size die chip that has formulated on the left side of Monticello right there, and then they collect as the chip gets larger. They want an example of that all the way up to the largest event for that particular Beehive die chip. So again, another thing to look out for. These things sell for a few bucks. The larger die chips I've seen go as high as $15, $20. You're not going to get rich, but what if you came across a honey hole of them, going through a bank box of brand new nickels, and you come across maybe 100 of these? What do? My suggestion is to put together a progression set and sell it as such. You could get about $40, $50 for that. I've done that before, and it's a lot of fun to do. The next one that we have here is what they call retained die break or pre-cud. Retained die break is the old terminology that people have been using for decades. Pre-cud is kind of like the new made for today kind of terminology. And what it is it's not a full-blown cud, but it's the exact shape and kind of like size of where the cud would be after it's evolved into the more terminal states. So with a pre-cud or retained die break, you have a clear and definitive entry point of a crack on one area of the rim, and it goes through the design details, and you can actually follow the crack all the way through, and then it'll make an exit somewhere else on the rim. Another thing to keep in mind, this is something that people have talked about, is that you want to see displacement. Like in this particular instance, the top of the wheat stalk here, you can see some displacement of the design. It shifted a little bit higher on the left side of the crack, and it doesn't quite line up to the actual wheat stalk itself. So that's what they call displacement. With the displacement, and you have at least 2 entry points of the crack that connects to the rim, and you could follow it through all the way through the design devices. That is what they call a pre-cud. These surprisingly have quite a bit of value on the low end. I've seen them at $5 to $10, you know, especially on Lincoln Cents. I've sold a number of these for between $15 and $20. I used to find them all day long as I was going through wheat cent bags. But this is a case where a piece of the die had fractured but hadn't completely fallen off. Here's another really, really dynamite example of a retained cud on a brand or semi-brand new 2021 Lincoln Shield Cent. This is, of course, a coin that really blazed a trail last year of how badly the U.S. Mint was screwing up, even in today's production standards. So this one right here is a retained cud with a massive interior die break, kind of similar to what that cracked skull was. So this has multiple events, but you can see the crack that starts here under the VDB initials and goes through this area here and then exits here right at K3 or the 3 o'clock position on the coin. So they call this a K3 to K7 die crack or retained cud. The reason why it's a retained cud and not a full-blown cud is that this piece right here that was obviously loose enough to nearly fall out still has design on it. Okay, when there's no design whatsoever and this part is more raised in relief on the coin, that's where you have a terminal state full-blown cud die break, which we do have an example of it here momentarily. But this is a coin, this is actually quite pretty in this condition. I've seen my fair share of mid-state reds of this, and you know, when it's mid-state red, you're kind of really more nitpicky about the details of the coin. Like, oh, there's a scratch here in the fields of this one and not on this one, and, you know, so on and so forth. But even with a retained cud, you're going to get a considerable amount of weakness on the reverse of the coin in that area. Especially one like this where the die had cracked catastrophically to the point where it almost falls out. There's enough play in that little piece of that die to where it's not going to apply a full pressure during the strike and leave a lot of weakness on the reverse. All right, and the final progression, of course, in its most terminal states is a full-blown cud, and we have here a question mark / mystery dated coin. This is a full-blown event of what happens when the die piece actually falls out and then continues to mint some of these coins. If there's no die piece there to support design on that coin in that spot, it's going to allow this just billowed raised event. This actually fools a lot of people because some who don't know a lot about the actual error process of die failure will look at this and say, oh, someone accidentally put solder on there. You know, that's like a common response I hear all the time. I'm like, no, you really have to examine what you have, especially when you have to flip the coin over and look at the reverse. Look at all that weakness on the reverse. And the reason why that happens is if the die piece isn't there any longer and it strikes the coin, guess what? It squeezes the coin and presses it up against the collar. So you have all of this metal flow that's happening during this really quick striking process. So with the metal flow, if there's a cavity or a piece of the die that had fallen out or a interior die break, if that's not there, guess where all that metal flow goes into? That's right. It goes into that empty cavity where the die piece had fallen out on the die, therefore leaving a raised, billowed kind of metallic look. On Lincoln Cents, it's going to be copper, obviously, but because of that, there's no real pressure on that area to produce a full reverse strike. And that's why there's a lot of weakness in that area. So make sure you're looking out for that. If you're trying to define of whether or not that coin is legitimate, that's something to be on the lookout for, because with any decent sized cut die break, you will have a lot of that weakness on the reverse as well. This is, of course, again, part of my classification of when I say cuds are king on the secondary market, because these things are ridiculous right now. Like this one has 3 days left and the price is up to $127.50. If you find coins like this, congratulations, that's a heck of a payday, and you could really cash in on these because they are incredibly collectible to this day, and they have been for about the last 10 years, and I don't see any slowing down of the cud die break anytime soon. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. Just kind of like a quick little progression of what happens when dies fail and collars fail as well. You get some pretty extraordinary stuff. And that's just the part of life, right? I'm going to go ahead and use a quote that I heard on a very popular movie. You know, we live in an imperfect world. Screws fall out all the time, right? Where you guys hear that from. Go ahead and comment below if you know where that came from. You know, it's like even today in 2022, almost 2023, it's not going to let up. We're going to see some more incredible mint errors because, hey, guess what? The process of minting our own money and our currency is still put into the hands of human beings, and that human error element still exists today. So something to keep in mind. You know, again, it's a great time to be alive in the hobby where you can find a lot of this stuff because parts fail, right? That's just how it's going to be. Maybe 500 years from now, when the process is perfect, although I don't think there will be physical coins and money in 500 years, but if that were the case, you know, we're still going to see human error as long as humans are involved in the process. So that's going to go ahead and wrap it up, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Sean, with BlueRidgeSilverhound. Thank you again so much for all of your time. You guys have been fantastic. This was a lot of fun to talk about. A very comprehensive A to Z look of what happens when these parts fail. You know, it produces some really nice end product and very collectible, might I add. So look out for these. That's going to go ahead and wrap it up. You know, do all the things on screen. Check me out on TikTok as well. I'm on there. Don't forget to follow me on that platform. But that's it. You guys take care. Happy hunting. And I will see you on the next coin video. So long.